Good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. We have a really cool topic. We're going to be talking about using AI and machine learning to fully automate your CI/CD pipeline with Harness and Datadog. Today's webinar is sponsored by Harness. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'll be your host and moderator. A few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and we will send a link to the recording following the webinar. I believe we're sending the slides too. I'll confirm that with everybody. Also, we have a drawing at the end, so stick around. We're giving away, I think it's three or four Amazon gift cards. We'll announce who the winners are and how to get in contact with us to receive those. Also, our speakers love questions. We'll have to have time for some Q&A. We've got a great demonstration, real time kind of see things, how this works. There's also some kind of introductory information. So put your questions into the questions tab or into chat, and we'll catch them either way and try to answer as many of those as we can. So let's move on to our topic, using machine learning to fully automate your CI/CD pipeline using Harness and Datadog. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. One's on camera. One is incognito, part of the CI/CD Witness Protection Program, so we can't disclose his location or visual identity. Our two speakers today are Nick Durkin, who's CTO of Harness, and Ravi Lockman, who's joining us via voice, who's evangelist with Harness as well. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Thanks for the introduction. So Ravi Lockman here, evangelist at Harness. And so who are your guides today? So I'm Ravi Lockman. I'm an evangelist at Harness. I worked at a few firms before. I worked at Messenger, IBM, Red Hat, to name a few firms, as a distributed systems engineer, and joined alongside my buddy Nick. Nick, just a little bit of introduction about yourself.
Sure. My name's Nick Durkin. I'm our field CTO here at Harness. I think I was employee number 9, but ultimately been doing this for a while. But before this, came to here from the financial services sector, where I designed patents around security and audit and authentication. So want to take that delivery as well as security function across. But yeah, here for you guys today.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Very excited to be here and be talking to everybody. Don't be shy to ask questions. Really, Nick and I are great resources to answer all of your questions around continuous delivery. And so what are we going to be talking about today? So we're going to kind of level set on the state of continuous delivery here in 2021. And then we're going to dive into letting the artificial intelligence and machine learning help. And then don't suffer with Harness and Datadog. So really action-packed agenda for us today. So let's take a look at the state of continuous delivery 2021. So what is continuous delivery? Let's just level set with that. So a lot of times you'll hear the eponym CI/CD or CI /CD kind of aggregated there. But continuous delivery and continuous integration are two separate things. Here in this lovely diagram, there's two books: the Jez Humble and Dave Farley book versus the Paul Duvall book. Is that continuous delivery focuses on getting your particular changes into production in a safe manner versus continuous integration that's more focused on build automation. And so with that, there's a lot of different steps that we have to take into effect after the artifact is created. Now, once we have a viable release candidate, how do we actually get that release candidate through the quality assurance and confidence building exercises? And how do we actually get that into production safely? And so one of the things that's very interesting to bring up here is another book. So we're on book number 3 now in the presentation. So this book called Accelerate by Nicole Ferguson and Jez Humble again. Is that, well, how do you start measuring effectiveness of getting something into production, right? And so there's lots of ways to measure that. There's kind of a changing adage of what a software engineer is kind of responsible for. So if you take it back, I'll actually give an example. Over a decade ago, my main job responsibility was actually just creating an artifact. Now, because of the rise of full lifecycle development, more and more developers are being tasked of, is actually your feature reaching production? And so how do you start to measure this? These are, really key deployment metrics you can look at. One would be deployment frequency, so how often you're deploying. Also, lead time for changes. Well, how long of a lead time do you need to kind of actually propagate and also prep those changes? And if there is a failure, mean time to recover, right? So if you have to do a rollback, how long is that time frame for when you notice a problem or there was an incident to actually you have a service recovered, for example, going back to the last known state, that is recovery. And then how often does your deployments actually fail, right? So that's change failure rate. When you aggregate those and kind of look at those, and we'll take a look, crack open the Harness product, how we can show that a little bit later today. Now, that's how you're really tracking your key deployment metrics, right? So now we have a good baseline of how do we measure efficiency. We have a good understanding of there's a difference between CI and CD. And so let's talk about why there's this particular complication with continuous delivery today. So if we go back to, way back when, 10 years ago in the 2000s or more, if you take a look at what a software engineer had to do, actually, this was my life. I was a J2E and JE developer for more than half my career. And so what my main responsibility would be was building a distribution, right? So I might write some Java, I might write some JMS, and I package it up in a WAR. That's the CIPs. But then when we deploy it, we're deploying to one of three target systems, right? So there's either WebSphere, WebLogic, or JBoss. Most of the time it's JBoss for me. But we do have some understanding of those particular systems. Now, there's a person who actually would deploy for me and have access to prod most of the time. So that would be the mystic middleware engineer or release engineer. But those three particular platforms are fairly opinionated, right? They might be running on a VM. There's a very specific way I would deploy to JBoss. They have very specific ways of deploying to a cluster. If you take a look at now what the guardrails and the, let's say, the mantras that were in place 10 years ago, this is not the case today, right? So I'm the same person, if you can see me, but I'm in the continuous delivery witness protection program here, exposing this information. So if you take a look at what's happening in the 2020s, well, I'm the same person. If you can see me, I'm just a little bit whiter and grayer in the hair, but the same body. But not only is my responsibility the Java artifact, which has more, I would say, more pieces in it. So now there's not only JMS and Java piece, but there's Node pieces, there's Kafka pieces in there. We have to deal with a lot more open source going left to right. And also, I'm kind of tasked with, well, if you build it, you need to automate the build. So, okay, I have to provide some Jenkins scripts. I might have to provide the Terraform to lay down the infrastructure. I have to make packaging decisions. So I put in a Docker image or a message container. Going even further right, we're going to deploy to Kubernetes. So I need to start deciding how I'm going to package up our deployment to Kubernetes. What logging frameworks I need to use. We use SnapC, Fluentd, sort of tracing frameworks. And it makes matters even worse. We're deploying to the public cloud. So there's that level of infrastructure there. And so with all of these kind of bespoke choices, like imagine each one of these as a route you can take. These choices are actually pretty bespoke organization to organization. So deploying and delivering software to each one of these stacks is different. How I lay down the infrastructure is different. How I deploy the application is different. Does it need to be infrastructure aware? It's all different. And this is where we lead to, this is the life that people live in 2021. There's lots of choices that you have. And so this leads into something called pipeline patterns. So shameless plug here at Harness, we recently released a book called Pipeline Patterns a few weeks ago. So we have the ability to kind of interview and talk to our customers and take a look at probably the top 10 patterns that these particular customers have when they implement a delivery pipeline in the Harness platform. And so there's actually there's several ways that your pipeline patterns actually being developed. And so there's a few causes that are out there, and I'll kind of get into those in a few seconds. But basically, your pipelines follow a few ways. So kind of the state of 2021 in your continuous delivery, your particular pipelines are modeled after maybe service centric. So do you have to deploy one-to-one service? And here, this is an example of a three artifact or three service deployment. Are they confidence building inspired? So are there particular test cases that kind of move the particular pipeline forward? Or even getting into more subjective, this is approval centric, right? So your pipeline is determined by number of approvals. And so if we take a look at this particular pipeline, this one is fully automated. It comes after a CI trigger. There's some checks that go on, and then there's canary deployments. If you're unfamiliar with that, we'll kind of dig into that a little bit later. Then here's that verify piece at the bottom. So Nick, later on in the presentation, will be looking at, well, how do we actually make that judgment call in an automated fashion? So we'll be using Datadog today to kind of make that judgment call and can kind of continue that forward. But if we harp on that last piece, is your pipeline confidence inspired? Is really you start to model your pipelines actually where you lack confidence in one of these three areas. So being on DevOps.com, it would be remiss if we didn't talk about this trifecta of people, technology, or people, process, and technology. And so your pipeline really mimics, ironically, where do you have the least confidence? Are you least confident in the people? So there's a lot of manual approvals in your pipeline. Are you least confident in the technology? So you're kind of like rechecking and checking things all the time based on what the state of your infrastructure is. Versus, are you not confident in your process at all? So you have multiple pipelines for multiple environments. Well, your pipelines will follow where your organization is, where quote unquote lack confidence. But don't worry, pipelines can definitely instill confidence today. And also with your continuous delivery investment, there's this mantra of a project versus product. So here, our friends at Accenture kind of laid this out. With continuous delivery, especially with continuous delivery, is that you need to take a product mindset, right? And so a lot of times when looking at engineering efficiency or enterprise IT or shared services or developer tooling teams, there's a push towards thinking as a product versus a project, right? So if you kind of consider, well, you know what, if we implement that one pipeline, we're done, right? If the project mindset over, you get it for one team, we're done. Well, not really, because as technology continues to evolve, core to engineering efficiency it's an ongoing evolution, right? So that's the life cycle. It's kind of going to be there. And also, you really start measuring your work structure and value. There's no bonus points if it took you a year to develop a pipeline to get one application out. There's not much value in that. And kind of like how your team is structured, right? So now it's all about delivering value. Can you deliver value quickly? And also, again, going down the list there, with core to iteration work, can you learn and improve? And then, again, just people-wise, like it's your team members, right? So you're building a particular product, it's there for the long term. So a little about AI, ML now, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so let's think about that deployment scenario that we have. We'll do a little bit of role playing. So I'll pretend that Nick is my boss. And so Nick might say, Ravi, go forth, young man, and deploy something. I'm like, okay, great. Once you get over that hurdle, actually the most uneasy and unqueasy feeling, I must have been to production like hundreds of times in my career. And ironically, I still get butterflies in my stomach when going to production. And part of the reason is I like to call the fog of the unknown or the fog of system development. Here's actually a call diagram of a microservice-based application. Good luck. It looks like one of those eye charts you stare at and like a pirate ship pops out. You're going to be inundated with logging data. Like one of the things I always struggled with was just knowing if the deployment was going correctly, because you start seeing different markers and different pieces of data that you're probably not exposed to in a local environment. You're probably not exposed to in the QA environment, and you're certainly not exposed to in a production environment. And so this is a compounding effect, right? There's only so much that, let's say, Nick and I can process as humans at one particular time. And usually that's where the bottleneck is, right? A lot of this is locked in tribal knowledge. And so I might only know how, let's say, one or two of my services interact together. I don't know how all 400 of these services interact. Or in aggregation, usually, like it might take several services to respond to something. I don't know how that's supposed to look, because I've only been on the project for a month. I have a couple more months and I'm gone. And that's usually how it is when you deploy. And so what do you need and what are you actually looking for, right? So this is the back and forth that Nick and I would have. Like if let's say we were both on a particular team or project for like a year, we in our heads, we're actually building this. So we know the context of the application. Hey, this is a shop the cart application, or my favorite application is called Wine for Pets. So it's a pet delivery, a wine delivery service for your furry friends. And so we start to know a little bit more about the context of the application, but also we have historical data. Like Nick and I are now principal engineers at wineforpets.com. We've deployed several times. We know what is expected to be normal. And then we kind of always check that against what's happening. So that test data, what's going on, if something's new. That is extremely tribal. That takes years of experience to kind of understand what's going on. But these are the things that you do when you're looking to make a judgment call that something is being deployed correctly.
I think even,
and so going back to
that, I apologize, even with that specifically, if you think about it, when you look at all the different types of deployments that you do, you have to think about it in different ways, right? If you're thinking about it in a canary deployment, I'm taking my live version versus my live version. If I'm doing it in QA, or if I'm doing it in a pre-production, a staging environment, I have to think about the last time I ran that load test versus this new time I'm running the load test. So my baselines and my tests are different. And as a human, we can start making these understandings, right? And we know what to compare against. If I'm doing this live in a production on a blue-green or even a traditional deployment, my traffic 5 minutes ago doesn't look like my traffic 5 minutes from now. Right, and so I can't use a canary analysis. I can't use a predictive analysis. I have to use predictive modeling to go back days or weeks or time periods to understand what a normal looks like, right? And what those again, different seasonality of our application looks like. And that only comes with time if you're a developer or if you're the engineer that's working on this. And this is where machine learning is extremely important. Sorry to interrupt, Robin.
Oh no, that's perfect. Yeah, even more more modern examples is like, yeah, like the velocity of when you have to make a decision changes. And so the applications are not static, right? Like as much as we like to believe it, they're not. You know, your traffic that you had 5 minutes ago could be different. And it's constantly a learning exercise. I always like to stick my finger in the wind and say, you know what, no one called. But that's a bad approach to kind of verify your deployment. But going back to like that what Nick was talking about, and my favorite word of the day, a judgment call. We do this all the time, but we do it as humans without systematic help, right? And so leaning back, imagine we're now captains of an airplane. We're leaning back on our experience, saying, hey, does everything look right? Does it feel right? You know, we've been using the application for X number of months. Are we getting complaints from anyone else? And we're also getting inundated by different data sources. So in this example, we're monitoring the infrastructure with Datadog and also monitoring the performance data with Datadog. So imagine we have multiple Datadog screens up, kind of making sure that, hey, what we're checking for in infrastructure is okay, is what we're checking for in the performance okay. Maybe we have some help there with Splunk, right, aggregating the logs to make sure that we're not seeing any erroneous errors. And then if there was some sort of business or throughput thing, there's other monitoring firms that kind of take care of that too. But really, that's it. It's during a deployment, you're actually making a lot of decisions. It's not just one and done. Going back to canary deployment or a canary analysis. So for those of you, if you're not familiar with a canary deployment, it's a incremental release, right? So it's made for safety. And so if we have, let's say, version 1 of our application is stable and version 1.1 is a canary, we would kind of slowly release the canary. So maybe 5% of the traffic is canary and 95% stable. And then you have to make this judgment call again. Did the 5% survive? Did it make sense? And then you start sliding over maybe, okay, you know what, it'll be 50-50 now, canary and stable. And then again, you make this judgment call. And then you keep going and say, okay, it looks really, really good. Let's go ahead and just flip the whole switch and say it'll be 100% canary, which now becomes stable, and the stable version becomes deprecated. But again, it's another set of decisions that you have to make. And so when looking at some of these decisions, let's talk about what we do here at Harness, right? So we have a lot of systemic support and processes into looking at something is right. So the first algorithm I want to talk about, this might be a little class in AI here, is something called symbolic aggregate representation, or SAX. So what SAX is really good for is, let's say you have a lot of time series data, right? So time series, it's basically a timestamp and some sort of metric that you're measuring. It's what you're looking for is looking for variance. So I always like to role play, pretend Nick's my boss again. So, you know, what we're doing when we're like just digging into the log data, like one thing might be load, right? Saying, hey, you know what, our load is a lot higher at this point in time than it is some sort of, say, CPU metric. Make it easy, right? Like this dimension is higher, and so there might be some variance. So if you take a look at the orange indicated there, that's the difference. Nick, I'm not sure if you have any more color to add about our.
No, I think this is it. It's over time, right? If we're looking at something that follows the constant load, this is a perfect example, right? So if you think about that load test that you run every single time, right, you should see the exact same pieces. The difference is that when you do this with live production data, you might not see identical versioning across each other. You might see different load coming from different customers, different times, and different pieces. And so this is one of those pieces that allows us to get some understanding about what's going on inside of a system. So I'm looking at data, say, from Datadog, right? I can see now that there's deviations between different metrics at different times. And using just one of these algorithms will be fine if we're only looking at it for previous analysis, but wouldn't necessarily work in canary, wouldn't necessarily work in predictive. And so we have to take an aggregate of multiple models to actually make this work. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that we're going to look at is how do you take multiple pieces of models to actually make an understanding the same way a human would. Right? I know I'm getting nerdy, getting into the pieces, but with a Markov model specifically, right? This is going to take an understanding of what normal behavior looks like for an instance. And in this case, you know, if we look at the Markov model, today it looks like it's what, a 70% chance of rain. If so, apparently I have the highest percentage to go clean, followed by shopping, right? I'm not going to go for a walk because it's raining. And this is taking an understanding of what data is missing so that if we do see this again, we should be able to make that correlation. What this also allows us to do is take for incomplete data or out of order data. And so if you take a hidden Markov model and you actually stick it on top of the previous one with the SAX model, we see two different peaks, right? Which if we actually reorder them, they actually come back down to each other and you actually now see normalcy. And so this is a way a human brain would actually work, not by functioning on just one of these algorithms, but by multiple. So now you can take and have an understanding the same way your best engineer would, right, with those time series data affecting, again, how you're doing the analysis with the type of deployment to make that understanding.
Yeah, perfect. Very funny. Just a personal quirk. I gave this version of the talk in Seattle, and so like if you take a look at that diagram on the left, like what a markup model is, it's basically predicting based on a certain input, like what's the percent or weight that a certain output would happen. So usually Nick lives in the greater Phoenix area, so it never rains. That's where he lives. And I was giving this talk in Seattle. They're like, oh yeah, if it's raining, like we're still going outside. Like it doesn't matter what time of day it is. Like it'll rain every day in the winter time here. So a little bit, this model doesn't apply if you live in the greater Pacific Northwest. Let's see.
Perfect. I think what this leads us to as well is taking that same machine learning, that same understanding into logs, right? If you and I were to look at these two logs, we'd notice that they're the same, and that's because we have an engineering perspective. But if we actually diagnose it and we use just machine learning, the machine learning models, so your natural language processors would say they're very different, right? Because that account ID is different. And this is where it's interesting, sifting through data as we know it as a human is very different than sifting through it just with machine learning. Right? A machine learning model would say there's two very different logs, in which case you and I know they're not. They're the same log, they're just coming from different customers or different accounts. In which case now I have to apply neural networks. I have to apply artificial intelligence to understand what those same normalcies look like for humans. So is it UIDs, is it account IDs? They give you that understanding. And this is what's going to make it powerful, right? When the machine can actually think at speed with capacity, right? Infinitely, now being able to handle all of the log output and all of the signals that are coming out of your applications.
So we can talk about. I'll give a quick example about entropy. So when looking at log data, so let's say we were looking at these logs again, right? So log O plenty. So as humans, what we're looking out for is actually something that has actually a low entropy, right? So what entropy is, it's basically, if you look at that particular string, that 11111110111, it's like reminds me of Futurama when Bender kind of flips out. It's what is more significant? Is it the 0 or the 1? And so actually the presence of a 0 there is more significant than the presence of a 1 because it's new. And so going back to Nick and I are deploying our Wine for Pets catalog, we're looking out for errors, right? We're looking out for things that don't make sense. Like, hey, that was introduced like just now. But what's extremely difficult about that, I'll give you kind of a personal quirk here. My very first role out of university, I was working for IBM, and I was working for the TSA. So the project I was on was called Safe Flight. And so the very first deployment that I had, it was going from my local machine, which, like when Webster starts up, it's kind of a mystery. But then when we went to do a deployment, the cluster manager for Webster started throwing all these errors, and I'm flipping out. I'm there with the lead engineer. I thought I brought down the application. I'm like, I'm going to get fired. DHS is not going to be happy with me. And she was like, no, this is fine. Like, we see this kind of all the time in the cluster. I remember the product, Webster ND, the cluster manager starts up. We have like hundreds of warnings. I'm like, how is this possible? Like, and it still started up. But the entropy I was looking up for was warnings. So I never saw that in my local environment. But again, it took a lot of tribal knowledge to understand. If that lead engineer wasn't there, I probably would have been on monster.com that afternoon looking for a new job. And that's it, right? How do we know what we're looking out for is different? And so this comes into something that we're actually helped to visualize. Nick, I'll give it back to you. You said this so eloquently, actually what people are looking at here.
Yeah, so it's interesting. These come from a harness, deploying harness itself, and actually looking at and having an understanding of what normal looks like. Right, having a baseline and an understanding of what's normal, right? Being able to say, yep, we see it, it should be there. But then you'll see these reds on the left, and actually what we had happen was we actually had broken the authentication mechanism inside a harness. So every class was referencing this authentication mechanism. And the problem is what it did is it showed itself rather quickly, but it showed itself everywhere in the application. Every time anything tried to authenticate with anything, of course, it broke. And so instantaneously, we were very aware of what was going on, even though they were thrown for all different portions of the application. On the right is actually more of a traditional, what you would see. And this is where things change that are even hard for humans to assume. When you think about it, what if an error or an exception changes in frequency, right? It's an error we're used to. It's an exception we're used to, but it goes from 3 events a second to 300. But this becomes a problem that we want to go and actually look at. And I don't want to look at all the noise, right? I want to be able to weed out the noise. I want to get straight to the signal and understand what it is. And this is what the intention is to point that out specifically, which is here's the brand new errors and exceptions that are introduced in the system, or here's the ones that are changing in frequency that really matter to us.
Perfect. I think now it's time to talk a little bit about kind of the tour de force here. So we kind of explained several abstract concepts, but let's take actually a very concrete look at this. Nick, why don't we quickly explain a little bit about the Harness platform? So what does the Harness platform look like?
Sure. When we talk about Harness right now, we're talking about Harness is continuous delivery as a service, being able to take all of your artifacts, your containers, your jars, your wars, your tars, and be able to handle those long, complicated pipelines with all the different security and quality checks, but being able to actually reach out to all the different systems that's required. So talk to your artifact repositories, make sure that they place those artifacts either in your cloud or on your different orchestration tools, or to that point, SSH and drop them on that JBoss system, right? Beyond that, it's not just about getting the code, not just about getting the artifact to production, but it's really to the customer. And what do we mean by that is after you deploy, then you have to also verify. Right? We have to know that it's good, right? We have to be able to notify people out, and we have to keep your secret secret and keep everything audited. And today we do this in a SaaS model, but we also do this in an on-premise model if need be as well. And the intention is it's done lightweight, so you can have connectors sitting behind your firewalls to make sure this all happens, meeting your regulatory and security pieces. I think, Ravi, if it makes sense, and you tell me, we can go and actually just show a quick little demo of this, and we can watch how you can actually use that artificial intelligence with Datadog.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it'll be quite exciting.
Let me know when you guys can see my screen, I suppose. Maybe.
Yeah, I can see it now, so it came up for me.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and actually kick off a deployment. I'm going to kick off a CD pipeline. It's going to go from dev to QA into production. My previous implemented version was build 11. I'm going to go back to an older build. We'll go grab a much older build and deploy an older version of this application. And what you're going to see here through Harness is as we progress and as we move, you'll be able to see the data coming through for each task that we're actually accomplishing. So the reality is through dev, in which we're in now, I've done some testing. I wanted to make sure that my SonarQube scans were good. I've set quality gates, security checks and pieces, and then I've gone out and decided to do a deployment. If dev succeeded, we're going to move straight into QA. We've set failure strategies. If we ever fail, what do we want to do? But we also now can proceed upon success. In QA, right, we're going to do a whole bunch of tests. Again, we're going to look at the different pieces. And what I've seen is now that I'm set for an approval. I'll go ahead and approve this to get it to go. I've done this through an external approval. And then we'll go and actually show this go into production, and we'll monitor this with things like Datadog, things like Splunk to actually go and show that. So here I'm going to go approve this deployment so it can actually go forward. I'm doing this external with Jira, not required by any way, shape, or form. But again, designing these pipelines and creating them should be easy, should be simple. You should do them all as config as code, or again, you can do them inside of our UI. It's really kind of your choice. But make sure that you have the output of all of your tests, all of your quality gates and security gates set, so that you, again, can trust what's actually progressing through that environment, and then also alert out to all the tooling that you want. So make sure that you're updating the ticketing systems and pushing through. Once this thing goes ahead and approves, we'll go ahead and poll and make sure that our ticket approves. We'll go ahead and look at this going into production in a much more complicated deployment. Instead of doing, say, a basic rolling deployment, we'll actually go ahead and do a canary, and we'll put 2 versions side by side for you. The idea is that, again, we should abstract those complex deployments for you so that you don't have to configure or design large complex deployments. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're setting up a canary deployment, and then we're now going into the verification phase. When we think about the canaries, again, doing them for you, set up how many instances of the canary I wanted to push out, what percentage of production, keeping your secret secret throughout this whole process, making sure you have that. But then more importantly, after it's deployed, right, it's now running in production, how am I doing in comparison? And you can look at any metric that you have coming off any of the different tooling that you have. This one specifically looking at some metrics in Datadog. So looking at the things like the file system, the memory utilizations, and we're noticing that we've got some discrepancies. And if you think about it, what would be the first thing that our engineers would then go do, right? If we've got latency issues, if we've got memory issues, if we've got high CPU issues after our new deployment, we're probably going to go look at those logs as well. And that's exactly what we're doing. So now, the same way that your best engineers, right, are understanding what normal looks like in activity, in the analysis of those time series metrics coming from Datadog, they're also building a baseline in their head of what normal looks like for your deployment. So they can look at any one of these and say, yep, they're perfectly fine. I've seen them 1,000 times, right? No worries. I know this exception. It's that same knowledge that you gain, right? That tribal knowledge that Ravi was talking about. Now we can mark
that is
all of
exceptionally hard.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Nick. Yeah, like that's a huge point. Like that is basically one of the biggest parts of the learning curve. Imagine you're dropped into a new project. You could spend months learning that. Like it's been the biggest angst I've always had changing teams is like learning what is normal, and Harness does it systemically. Like this, it looks so simple in the platform, but like the angst you have with changing jobs is removed by the Harness platform. Bold statement there.
No, it's true. It's because it's thinking about it the same way that your best engineers have to do on every deployment. All right. Every time that you look at these deployments, right, when we go and dig deep into it, we only want to know about those anomalous ones. We want to understand what they look like, and we want to give it feedback. So whether these are actually valid signals or not, we can actually give it feedback, and we can say, hey, you know what? This isn't a risk. Don't worry about it. Right? Don't show it next time. We know what it is. It's perfectly fine. Or more importantly, this is a problem. Right? Let's go create a JIRA ticket for it and set it up. And we can understand how often these events come up, what's going on, what's through the pieces. So you can take all of the metrics over time that you're getting, all of those golden signals that you want to see from all of your different monitoring tools. You can understand what normal looks like the same way. You can also then start looking at your logs to make a decision what to do. And then based on your failure, you get the ability to actually choose, what do I want to do? Right? In this case, let's roll back to the previous version. Let's get back. Let's kill that canary. Let's go back to the production instance that was working successfully for our customers and not take the impact. And again, you can define this. Maybe it's a manual interjection, right? Maybe it's something where you choose differently to have your best and brightest come here and make those decisions, or maybe it's something you take automated action against. The entire idea of this is very simple. You can start deploying things quickly. You can break them out into microservices. You can break those large monoliths or those SOA architectures into true microservices. Not even dependent microservices, but true microservices. The problem is now that you've done that and the X number of now new deployments that you have, how do you start verifying what good looks like? And how do you break apart all of those different microservices to have that same understanding? And this is where truly machine learning and a little bit of AI, a little bit of neural networking goes a long way. If you think about it, if I stick a terabyte of logs to a brand new person who knows nothing about your logs, and I take those same logs and I give it to someone who knows about your platform, and then I give it to the machine learning models, it's a terabyte. Who's going to find the one difference faster, right? Well, I can guarantee you that the person who knows the system can weed through it a lot quicker than the person who doesn't. But I can definitely tell you that with the compute possibilities of the machine learning, you're going to get to it infinitely faster. So you'll find that specific needle in the stack of needles infinitely quicker. And this matters when you reach scale, right? This matters when you actually get to speed, where you have this become your next bottleneck. Ravi, is there anything else you wanted me to show and dive into? I think one of the things you had said specifically was talking about the accelerate metrics and understanding what those look like. One of the things is when you have inside of one platform, all of the information from all the different environments, from code commit all the way through to production, you know who's deploying it, right? You know what artifact they're deploying, you know which infrastructure they're deploying to, you know all the steps they've taken. You can then also start getting into information that's valuable, not only to yourself, but maybe to others. And that might be things like, the door metrics, the accelerate metrics, where we can actually start looking at all of the different structures that we have. So I can start looking at lead times. And I can see that I've got some of these deployments now that are actually causing me quite a little bit more time than they used to. I can also see those change failure rates to understand how we're doing, right? I need to go work with my PCF team because clearly we're struggling getting into deployment. And I can look at all these things like mean time to resolution, deployment frequencies, and you can grab all the metrics you want from the system because now you have in one place from code commit all the way through to production, you easily have access to this data. I do want to mention, if you hate everything that you've seen in the UI and you want to, get all this, you're more than welcome to using our API, so you can stick it in whichever tooling you want. Same goes for any of the configuration that you saw. Any of these deployments, you of course can configure them inside of a UI, but you're more than welcome to do this all as config as code, because you might, again, hate our UI. So just want to make sure that just because you saw a UI doesn't mean you have to leverage it specifically.
I love the UI. I'm like the absolute anti-pattern engineer. I try to avoid a command line interface as much as I can. Yeah, that's great stuff, Nick. Might kick it back over to Mitch now. So Mitch, I'm not sure if there was any questions that were asked. And don't be shy. Nick and I love questions, and we're here to answer. And this is your time. And so really here to help answer any sort of questions you might have.
Have them here. We've got a good bit of time. So first question is, does Harness only work with Datadog? I'm guessing you work with other things too. I know you're talking about Harness and Datadog today. Can you give us an idea of the broader suite of things that Harness works with?
Great question. Absolutely. So Harness works with any of the APM tooling that you can imagine, any of the monitoring tooling you imagine. So the AppDynamics, the Dynatraces, the New Relics of the world, as well as any of your cloud specific. So your cloud watches and your stack drivers. It also allows you to take any custom metrics. So what's important is a lot of our businesses, they have golden metrics that they track outside of those tools. Retailers, for instance, APM might look fine, their performance metrics might look fine, logs look fine, but they keep track of what percentage of customers put things in their checkout counter and what percentage buy, and that's a metric that they want to track as well. So again, we could take any of those custom metrics that you want in time series, and then of course in the logging, any log aggregator you could imagine. We have customers that even use large Hadoop clusters to store their logs. So whatever log aggregators, Elk, Splunk, Sumo Logic, or the clouds as well. So really looking at two different types of data, event and time series data, and then looking at logs. So
great. Yeah, I would imagine tools for developers are probably pretty developer friendly to do other things with, integrate.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Another question that we had come in was, do other platforms do similar things? I guess general question here, but specifically they're asking about, they heard that Kayenta from Spinnaker open source has some similar functionality. Can you talk to that?
Sure. Yeah. Great. Go ahead, Ravi.
Yeah, I could talk to kind of some of that. So there's been kind of a push since we've been around. If Harness was kind of first to market with this type of validation stuff, right? It's actually one of our core differentiators, and we were a company was founded a few years ago. And so there are other platforms that are kind of moving towards this, because there's a great deal of value in this type of validation. And I'm not sure who asked that question. They're specifically talking about Spinnaker, which is another open source continuous delivery platform out there. But specifically, I think the question was for Kayenta. So Kayenta is their machine learning decision-making piece of the tooling. Now, I haven't worked directly with Kayenta before, so I can't comment on it. But I do know several of our customers came from Spinnaker renditions, or kind of have a bifurcated process or moved to Harness. And I don't really think many of them use Kayenta. I don't have feedback for it specifically, but there'll be more and more of these particular tools in the marketplace. But the Harness, we were one of the first to market. Also, we make it very easy, right? The setup that you didn't see Nick do would probably take you 10 minutes. And the platform will guide you through it. So Nick, I'm not sure if you have anything to add or subtract.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So working directly with Kayenta, phenomenal tool if you guys are doing canary deployments, and only if you're doing canary deployments. And that's an interesting one, is a lot of people have aspirations to be fully canary, but most of us do traditional blue, green, or different types of deployments. And that's where Harness's machine learning models don't just cover what's happening with 2 live versions in production, and also we use machine learning where Kayenta uses thresholds. So you can set an SLA and say, hey, if I've breached an SLA, let me know. What we do is we take context of the deployment. So if and we talked about previously, if you do this in a QA environment or a staging environment, we're going to look at it in a previous. So we'll take that last time you're in that load test, and we'll look at those high watermarks, and we're going to compare them. And so we're going to do this in a previous analysis type. Sure, we'll do the canary like Kinda does, but we'll apply the machine learning. So if you get faster over time, our machine learning models will know that to then alert you, not when you've hit that slower SLA, but actually, as you've gotten better, we'll alert you sooner. And then, blue greens, of course, this is where, a lot of folks are in blue greens or traditional deployments into production. And this is where, again, a Kinda isn't going to give you any help because you don't have two live versions. And so here we're going to use predictive modeling. And I'm going to go back and look at the last day, the last week, last month, and understand what normal looks like for your application over time, with the traffic that you get, because your traffic live in production doesn't look like, it did 5 minutes ago. So can't use previous, can't use canary, we'll use predictive modeling. So Harness thinks about it the same way your best engineers would, depending on what type of deployment, and we support all your deployment types, where traditionally modern tooling like that's come out and been open sourced from Netflix is period just for a canary deployment, which if you guys are all using canary at your company, awesome. Good job and good luck. If not, we can help you out.
Awesome. Cool. Next question is a funny one. What about the data? I know you talked about the data in terms of machine learning and some predictive modeling, and everyone always wants access. There's so much great information, data that oftentimes goes unmined in our tool chains. Talk about some of the uses of data, both within Harness and then other things you see customers doing outside of Harness.
That's
Perfect.
a pretty wide brush question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Robin.
So that question is really broad. Yeah, so that question is like, what about the data? I mean, they can be interpreted a couple of different ways. Like when I've gotten a similar question to that before, so I'll take the first stab. I think whoever that person, I'm not sure who asked the question, maybe about data, like they had to do a rollback or something like that. Because usually that's usually the question I get in these type of continuous delivery talks. Because one thing that if you were close to watching what Nick was doing, like a rollback actually got triggered based on the validation failure by convention, right? Like most likely you would go back if there was some sort of validation or regression. Then it can be sticky. There's tools out there that are database versioning, like Flyaway or I forget the one, Liquibase, Nick. There's a couple of them out there, and also like there's commercial tools like DB Maestro that kind of help you take the data and version it, and if there's a rollback, kind of reapply the last schema. Not sure if that's what the question was going. If you want to take the,
well, I'll even take Mitch's direction on it too. With all of this, you're going to collect a massive amount of that, and to that point, people want to use it where they want to use it, and Harness wants to make it accessible to you. So one of the things I showed some of the graphs, and the reality is all of that's available through GraphQL. So any of the metrics and the data coming off of the tool, you can grab and get from there. So if security wants to use it in a specific way, or if the executives want to graph it in a different model, or if you want to have an understanding of where your teams are at and where you can actually help them, right? All of that's available to be exported wherever you need. And I think that's the key, is that today, having these tools, if we're doing our deployments, they're in 27 different systems and we're not getting all of that information. So I think either way you look at it, whether it's talking about the data and how we integrate with those tooling, or if you talk about it in what you can export, kind of both of those options there around data. I did see one question in the bottom, Mitch, that somebody asked about how is Harness consumed. So he said it mentioned it's SaaS. How is it consumed? Interesting question. So I think I'm going to take this around the licensing portion. If it's not, please go and modify.
That's going to be my question too. So I'm glad.
Great question. So I think most people, I'd say, hey, what if I charge you per deployment? And that's pretty counterintuitive to continuous delivery. I want to deploy faster. I want to deploy more. And then if I say, well, what if I charge you per developer? We've got tons of developers, right? Why would I want to do that? So if I said, how about if we charge you for what you use? So what do you have Harness deploy, manage, verify, potentially roll back, and keep track of all of those systems? So that's exactly how we charge it. So, if it's a pod, if it's a JVM, whatever it is that we're deploying and managing and potentially rolling back for you, that's what we charge you for. So as you consume more of it, you pay more, and you should be getting more value out of it, of course.
It's almost an inventory based, depending on how many devices you're managing, deploying.
Exactly. Agree. And it's, if you think about it, it's very similar to the way any of the tooling that you're used to, right? It's consumption model based. You want to use more of it, you're going to pay a little bit more for it. And if you don't worry about it.
So specifically to the SaaS question, right?
Yep.
Is it SaaS, not SaaS, on-prem, both?
Yep, great question. So even the SaaS model, and I can go back to the architecture, has an on-premise portion of that, which means we hold the manager in SaaS. So what you saw, the UI and what's configured and what's telling everything to do what it does, that is SaaS. Even in the SaaS model, you'll have what we call those delegates, which will sit on-premise with you, so that they can be close to the things they need to. They can talk to your um, your artifact repositories and your secrets managers and so forth. If you don't like the SaaS model, and to be fair, 80 some odd, 82% of our customers, I believe, are SaaS. So if you want to, by all means, if not, you can run that entire infrastructure on premise. So we can kick that up and say a Kubernetes cluster, and you can have basically, instead of app.harness.io, you can have harness. Whatever your URL is, and it'll be your own private. And we can auto update that for you, or you can set timeframes that you want to update that as well. One of the things we did want to take out of the pain out of it, a lot of people are used to upgrading things like Jenkins or so forth, and it's a huge workload. Even with our on-premise, we can offer automated updates for you so that you don't have to do that workload.
Interesting. And the customer user has control over that. So, tool chains aren't breaking because something gets updated. Nobody knew about it, that kind of thing, I imagine.
That's exactly it. Yep. Nope. 100%. We keep things. So our amount of testing is quite insane that we do, even just internal to our tooling. But of course, you can set different prioritization for updates and different clusters as well. So if you're really paranoid about it, you can have even a pre-production harness cluster if you want to accept the changes and test it there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So all the same software delivery lifecycle that you want, we do offer as a full SaaS, where you don't have to manage any of it. Makes your life easier, takes away that whole burden.
Yeah, Sanjita has a question about how does one get started using Harness? How easy it to set up? Imagine the cloud portion of it is sort of load and go, right? Just run and go, and you're up and running, much easier than on-prem. But I know there's also a community edition. Talk about sort of how do people consume this and get into using Harness?
Sure, Ravi, do you want to talk about the community and how we can get started?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. Yeah. So it's actually very simple to get started with Harness. Like it'll actually get you really, really far really quickly. So if you go to harness.io, you can click sign up, and there's the free forever account. So you join the Harness SaaS. And then the only thing you need to do after that is that we have this worker node model. So you need to install a Harness delegate. And so it's pretty much ubiquitous where it can install. If you use a Minikube, you can have a Kubernetes delegate. If you have some extra Linux space, you can install it on a VM somewhere, or kind of subdivide your own machine. But that's basically it, right? If you want to kind of practice what you've seen today, we have lots of excellent examples in the Harness documentation, also the Harness blog, and the Harness community, which is community.harness.io. So it's actually very straightforward. What's interesting about Nick and I actually used to run some technical classes for people, and you actually get to touch technology that you don't get to touch before. So like really funny plug. I used to be a big detractor of Amazon ECS, but I never used Amazon ECS. I only read what the pundits said. I'm like, I kind of grew up in Kubernetes, so it's like no need for me to use Amazon ECS. It's hard, blah, blah, blah. I bought into that. It wasn't until I came to Harness that I actually used Amazon ECS for the first time. And I actually really enjoyed it because Harness made my deployment super simple. I'm like, actually, I really like this. Like, this is fairly easy to use. So with the Harness platform, because we're like a Swiss Army knife, we touch lots of different technologies. You can actually pick up using something that you never touched before, even as gray and wide am I getting white now. That's it, right? You can get excited about new technology and not worry about how you're going to deploy.
I'll leave it with one just kind of succinct statement. If it's more complicated than what you do today, don't use it.
I bet the customers will do that, right? If
That's
it's
it.
harder to use, they'll do something else. So that's actually what I would like to ask you about. We live in a world of talk about the democratization of software, right? Developers choose so much of the technology stack that we're using. It doesn't go through the traditional IT, hierarchy decisions. And so companies like Harness not only have to sell, quote unquote, to developers, you have to have a great DevRel, developer relations approach. You have to think, breathe, eat, just operate like developers, or else developers kind of sniff that out, right? And they say, you're not real. You don't know what I'm doing. You're not like I am. How does Harness approach, being as close to the customer and really understanding what the needs, challenges, and the world of other developers is like?
Sure. I think, to start with, we've always deployed Harness with Harness. And so the thing is that, we're living the pain. We understand what it is. We're holding, a SaaS service that has required SLAs and uptimes, just the same as the customers we're selling to. We have to meet security and regulatory commissions the same way that they do. And so those things that actually become a burden upon the developer, that I want to build my artifact, but I don't want to think about all the security requirements. I don't want to think about all the different places this can be deployed. What we try to do is take off the burden that they don't want to deal with, right? I'm not sitting here telling them how to write and build their artifacts and where to publish them. It's plug and play with all the different settings that you want to be. If you want to use this CI tool or that CI tool or that set of pieces, be agnostic is our approach. But understand the pain so we can take away those pain points for the development community, and that's where we've been successful. Everyone here on the phone is deploying software today. Right? It's not like they haven't deployed software. It's not like they're not doing it. In fact, they've spent years probably perfecting it, infinitely. Now, when we find it successful with harnesses, you're moving from that jar, that war, that tar to a container. You're moving from your on-premise to Amazon. You're moving from Amazon, wherever it is. If you're moving from somewhere to somewhere, oftentimes those people who've been writing that deployment for the last 6 years, they don't want to do it again, because the 3 o'clock, a.m. get up because the deployment tool broke that they wrote, and no one wants to do that anymore. What they want to do is actually write things that are beneficial to the company, and so we help them do that. And I know it was a long answer to a short question, Mitch, so hopefully that's okay. But that's really what we see.
I can totally relate.
I even have some.
Go ahead.
Can I answer part of that question too, Mitch? Something that I'm really passionate about is a lot of what Nick just said there. Like core to being a developer, you want to expand your skill set. So let's talk about, let's say there's a new technology out there. Let's say us 3 came up with an open source project and we have a funny colored O'Reilly book with a ferret on the outside, or pick your animal choice. So if we kind of dissect, like, hey, you know what, there's a new piece of technology, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, like, you want to use it. The first 30 pages of the O'Reilly book is like, hello world. There's some basic CRUD application. The other 770 pages of that 800-page O'Reilly book are operational tasks, like how you deploy it, how do you upgrade it, what do you do in a failure, like very complex application infrastructure management tasks. And with Harness, we actually make that easy. So no matter if you're like as a developer, if I want to learn Istio, like we help you deploy that. We help put some scaling or some scaffolding of facades around. This is a best approach when deploying a new route and how you do traffic shifting. Or you have a traditional application like a Java or JTB application, like we're that bridge that we're basically reducing that other 770 pages for you so you can learn new technology. Again, my point case is Amazon ECS, right? Like I was able to learn that and deploy something successfully versus just kind of like shunning it. Because what we see in a lot of organizations, or what I see especially, is that's the biggest part of getting a no. It's like, okay, you want to use this? Well, how are you going to operationalize it? And as a developer, now you're empowered to say, we're not worried about how we're going to deploy it because a tool like Harness is there to help us do that easily.
Excellent. I have 2 questions here left to finish us up with. First one is, I noticed, I know that Harness uses GraphQL for your API interfaces, which is awesome. Talk about when folks are most likely going to want to dip into the API and what kind of things they may want to do with it outside of the normal things you can build through the UI and other capabilities.
Sure. Yeah, I think in GraphQL, what we see a lot of it is under the automation of adding teams, wrapping the role-based access control around those teams, and making sure that they have kind of their subset-based templates and pieces in place. All this can be done as config as code as far as the actual, what the pipeline's going to do, but all of the portions that you want to hold through security and governance, those can be done through the GraphQL. And then the other side is the data pull. So pulling any of this off, maybe to dump to Splunk to make sure that you have it for even longer term storage, or to visualize. And so again, the GraphQL API makes perfect use for that. Mitch, I did see one in there about Terraform. I don't know if you...
Yeah, that was the other one I wanted to get to. Please do.
Perfect.
On that. Terraform building pipeline. Talk about that.
Sure. No. So one of the things that's interesting is there's always this idea of infrastructure provisioning, and that's a native and a first-class citizen inside a Harness. And so whether it's Terraform, whether it's CloudFormation, really, whether it's the script as a provisioner to provide that underlying infrastructure, this is key. and you've already written a ton of this, just like you've already written your CI, and so want to interact with those systems. So full native integrations with Terraform, so that you can do things like ephemeral environments for your devs. So spin up an entire new environment, then go do the deploys, do the verifications. After it's done, maybe we tear it down. Or this could be used for larger enterprise automation, where we've got larger network segmentations and different things that are ancillary to the application that I want to apply before I ever do it. All of that's native to Harness, and it's really adding a Terraform step to apply, a Terraform step to destroy. You can do plans and applies and so forth. So Terraform is a phenomenal tool, and we love the folks over there. And it's a first-class integration. So any of that you want to do as a step in your pipeline, it's fully available in Harness. And the benefit, again, instead of having 17 different tools, it's all visualized and understood. So if you want to troubleshoot, you can see where those steps happen, whether it be in the CI tooling, the infrastructure provisioning, or the actual deployment and verification itself.
Great. Ravi, anything you want to add to that?
No, that was a very, very encompassing. Like it's kind of like the next generation, right? Like there's definitely been a switch to deployment pipelines being infrastructure aware. So, it's Nick brought up every salient use case, right? You're having ephemeral environments. Also part of the confidence building of the judgment call is, did the infrastructure perform or created like it's supposed to be? Years ago, I used to, like this journey that we've been on, a decade or more ago, it was have infrastructure awaiting me weeks before the deployment. Then it came down to days, and then it came down to hours. So now it's at the time of deployment. You're just spinning up resources at the time because of cost optimizations or resource optimizations. That's it. Like your deployments have to be infrastructure aware. That's something Harness and every use case that they laid out is pretty well supported with us.
Remember, waiting longer than weeks. So it's a great world for sure. Hey, we've talked about a lot of, very cool, sophisticated things we can do. Folks that are more just getting into this and starting down their journey of learning how to do CI/CD and deployments and being kind of very sophisticated about how they can do that. You have a community, right, that people can ask questions of and participate in as well. What other kinds of support learning? You talked about the books at the beginning. You go to your website, there's some CI/CD pipeline patterns, ebook. You guys have a lot of great resources.
Yeah, we have lots of great resources. I mean, feel free to interact with us. We have, if you want, Slack is more your poison. Join the community Slack. You can interact with us. We have an excellent website with excellent set of videos that we have. We call something called Harness University. So if you're going from zero to deploying Kubernetes, we kind of break it down very step by step. Also, we even talk about some of the validation stuff. But with Prometheus instead of Datadog, because we do for free with Prometheus in our examples. So we have lots of great resources. Just check out Harness.io. Feel free to contact Nick and I on the community. And we're always there to help people learn more about continuous delivery and continuous integration for that matter.
It's easy to try. Go to harness.io. You can download it and use. Heck, you can use the free community edition for life. And if you want to use any of the enterprise extra features, of course, we can work with you on that as well. But go ahead, try it, get access to all the features right away during the trial, and then move yourself to community if that's where you want to stick.
Fantastic. Great conversation, great content today, both of you. We appreciate our audience being part of this too. I want to take just a few minutes to take care of the last part of our housekeeping, announce our Amazon gift card winners. We have 4, Darren P., Heather P., Martin H., and Adrian C. And the great folks here at the Media Ops team will reach out to you to let you know how you can get a hold of those gift cards. So they'll be a few Christmas bills, if you still have some of those hanging around. So just a reminder, we've recorded today's webinar. You can view it on demand. You can share it with others. So please check that out. It'll be in a link that will email everybody that was a participant in today's webinar. You can also go to devops.com and check out the inventory of past webinars, this one as well as others, and some really great content there. And check out what else is coming up. So we look forward to doing more things with Harness and with you as our audience. So as your host here today, moderator, I want to thank both Nick Durkin and Robbie Lockman for just being fantastic presenters and really entertaining. It held my attention, so that's pretty good. At my age, sometimes that's a little difficult. So appreciate it, guys, for doing a good job. And you know what? We've spent an hour of time together. And the fact that you, our audience, would spend that hour with us, your time's extremely valuable, especially in this time that we're all working remotely and doing a lot of work. So we're very honored you would spend it with us, and we hope we've used it well. So have a good rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in the harness community and elsewhere online. Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mitch.
everybody.